Hello, everyone. People are streaming in right now, and people will be coming in, so I'll do sort of a soft introduction. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Deborah Block. I am the producing artistic director of Theater Exile, and I am beyond happy, joyful, breaking at the seams to introduce Lyle Kessler here, playwright of Orphans. He is a playwright, a screenwriter, an actor, a producer, a teacher, so much. And we are so, so thrilled to invite you to Conversations in Exile. And before I actually let you talk, Lyle, I want to let everyone know how this came about. Obviously, you know that we're doing these conversations because we're all sequestered and quarantined. But I got a phone call just a couple days after we had to make the terrible, terrible decision to cancel our productions of Orphan. And I'm sitting in the office all alone because no one else is allowed to be around at that point. And I get a call, and it is Mr. Lyle Kessler on the phone reaching out to say, thank you for choosing to do this play. I'm so sorry. And I just want to thank you so much for that moment of kindness. Meant so much to me and allowed me to feel so connected to our community. I just want to thank you so much for that kind gesture.
Well, you know, it's interesting that the name of your theater in exile, because right now it's life in exile.
Yeah.
We're all in exile, so it's really pertinent till right now.
Well, it's true. And when Joe Canuso and Trish Kelly founded this company 23 years ago, they felt a little bit on the outside of the mainstream theater, and that's why it was called Theater Exile. And so we've been saying join us in exile for years, but it is truly now we are all in exile, but hopefully have a way of connecting with each other. And I think that is one, as we always are looking for the positive in anything and everything, I think finding new and different ways of connecting is what we are learning at this moment.
Well, I always felt myself to be a playwright in exile, spiritually, in terms of what I write about.
I mean, I agree, but why do you believe that?
Well, I think most of my characters, a lot of them are in exile. They're not, they live on the edge of society, some of them, but they live on the edge of a society, but they also emotionally, ethically, morally, and everything are part of society. They speak, I think, what I have to say comes out of these wonderful characters in exile.
I mean, we talk about what makes an exile play, and it is a lot of times it's people, just like you said, living sort of on the side, trying to navigate the gray morality that is life, the truth of life, or living with the parts of themselves or exposing the parts of themselves that we tend to like to keep in the dark. And I do think that your characters live there and are resonant there.
Well, I never really choose to say, well, I'm going to write characters who are in exile or in the fringe of society. I just begin writing characters in conflict. And it turns out that I guess that's where my psyche leads me without me knowing it. It's pushing me into that direction.
Well, maybe it's because you've lived so many places and you've done so many things. I'd love people to, if you could do an introduction of your journey of how your artistic journey and where that has taken you, because it has taken you across the country.
Well, I never knew that I would become a playwright. I went to Temple University for a year to hopefully take pre-med, but it wasn't in the cards for me because scholastically my mind was in my imagination and I wasn't really a very good student, except I learned by myself in the libraries. I studied on my own. It was very hard for me to follow a certain direction. So, and when I was a teenager, I went to see a movie called East of Eden that Kazan had directed with James Dean. And the movie moved me so. I mean, I felt it took place in Salinas, California, and I could almost smell, I could smell the grass and the lettuce growing there, and something about it triggered me into acting. So at that time, I quit Temple University, and I went to the Bessie V. Hicks School of Acting downtown Philly on Arch Street, right down the street from Betsy Ross' house, and a few blocks from old Bookbinders, if you remember that.
Sure, of course I do.
And that was the beginning. I think that gave me an insight being an actor in terms of what works on stage. So I was like a few steps ahead as a playwright. I knew exactly what worked on stage, and but I was an actor originally, as I think I mentioned to you. We did the Philadelphia premiere of Waiting for Godot in those years at the Academy Music Foyer, and from there I went to New York, and Bruce Stern was the other actor in the play, who became a movie star of some note, and so when I came to New York, I began studying with Lee Strasberg in his private classes, and then I got into the actor's studio in the director's unit initially, because I wasn't writing plays then. I'm looking for my first play to direct. I just sat down and wrote a one-act play, which I did there, and it was so incredibly received that it spurred me on to keep writing, and so that was the beginning of the journey.
That's wonderful. And for those who picked up on that or didn't pick up on that, Mr. Kessler, Lyle Kessler, is from Philadelphia. He got his grit from here. We claim your grit, Lyle, and the address of the home in Orphans, where the kids live, was where you were born. Is that correct?
That's correct, on Camac Street.
On Camac Street in North Philadelphia.
Right, right.
And so
I think I mentioned Camac Street on another play of mine. It seems to come back to haunt me.
Is it haunt you or inspire you? I'll say inspire.
Well, both. You know, you when you write, at least when I try to write, it goes into some areas of my psyche that sometimes I don't want to, my conscious mind doesn't want to deal with. And I'm dealing with issues that have emotional, real strong emotional issues within myself that I'm trying to work out unconsciously. Because in terms of writing, I try not to write out what I'm going to write ahead of time. I try to have the characters move me into the where it's going. The characters lead me into what the story is. And although I have some idea, but I only, writing films, because I write films also, there you have to be, your conscious and your intellectual mind has to plot out certain things ahead of time as to the direction you're going. Whereas in the theater, it's a great voyage of discovery. And that's the surprise and the fun of it. And so the process of writing really for the theater is to keep my intellect out of the way, so my unconscious and my imagination can lead the way.
Can you tell people, because obviously we were going to do the production of Orphans, and I know a number of people know the play. It was done in Philadelphia previously. Can you tell them a little bit about, from your take, what that story is about and the characters that you're attracted to there?
Well, it's about two brothers living in a house on Camac Street, an old house, who have been orphaned. Their father left when they were babies. The mother died, and the older brother takes care of the younger brother, and to survive, he becomes a thug, a pickpocket, a thief, and he mugs people, and he takes their money, and he buys the food, and he raises the other brother, who he keeps in the house, and it's their relationship. And one day he brings home this man that he picks up at a bar, who's an older man. He brings him home. He kidnaps him. He thinks he's a wealthy businessman. He thinks he's going to get money for him, you know, in terms of as a kidnapper. And what happens is this man, and this character was played by Al Pacino. It was played by Alec Baldwin. It was played by Albert Finney. That character has been played by some of the most extraordinary actors, world-class actors. And what he does, he sort of becomes the father, mother of the two boys, and out of chaos, he brings order, and he's a strong disciplinarian, but a very loving character. And he's being pursued by gangsters who want to get him because he's on the lam. He's been running from city to city, and he ends up in that house taking care of them. And it's, you know, and it's tragic at the end. I don't want to go into that, but he creates a family. It's very strange, extraordinary family between the three of them that these boys have never had, and gives them the emotional sustenance to survive and go on at the end. Because he dies at the end, and they mourn him, and they're emotional, but he's given them this love and caring that they never had, and he changes their lives. So, you know, it's had an amazing history. It's been done in every country in the world, and it continues to be done in every country in the world. I mean, countries that you never even thought theater was, like Iceland and Croatia, and it's been in Mexico and in Brazil, and it's going to have a revival in London on the West End in November, God willing. The theaters open up, which we hope will happen. And you know, when the play was done and it was a huge success, I would get these, at the end of the play, this character and all these actors who play it, they love it because he has a death scene. All actors love to do the death scenes, you know, so you give him a death scene, you know, you got your way ahead of the game. So he dies. In a way, he sacrifices himself. He stays there to take care of these two boys. And so I would get these letters from a number of Catholic priests who would tell me, would you write an introduction to our book about Jesus? We'd love you to do it, because they saw that the character dies and sacrifices himself. So I said to them, well, I'd love to write an introduction, but I have to tell you I'm Jewish. And so it was an amazing kind of revelation to them. They were still interested in me writing it, but that was a fun kind of thing.
That was actually, you touched on an answer to a question that Bill was asking, was why do you think it was so successful internationally? Because it really has. It has touched the imagination, and it's not just culturally through the United States, but all in so many different cultures and types of cultures.
Right. My wife and I were invited to Japan, and to see the production there, and to go. And they did it. It was a big success in Tokyo. And then the biggest theater in Tokyo did it, and it was an extraordinary success. But this small theater company traveled all around provincial Japan. And we went with them in a bus tour, and they would set up the theater wherever they were outside. And it was almost like a Fellini movie. My wife, who is an actress, Margaret, I want to bring her in here so people can see her.
Margaret Ladd.
My beautiful wife, Margaret Ladd. And so we went to Tokyo, and I couldn't believe it, because a lot of the Japanese don't show that much emotion. They're a little stoical, but boy, by the end of the play, they were emotional and crying, and it was amazing. It translates to every different kind of language and country. It was a big hit in South Korea for the last few years. And then they called me and they said, do you mind if we do this with 3 women? I said, well, God, it's never been done with 3 women, but why not try it? And then they did it with 3 women. It was a big success. So now they're trying to do it in America, have a first production of 3 women. So it's amazing, because I don't know of any other play that turns from men to women or whatever and back again.
It's and it really has captured the attention, but that's not the only work that you've done. I just read 2 of your more recent plays, House on Fire and Perk. and both, okay, so you didn't finish the journey, but you're in New York now, right? And you were working at the actor studio, and you and your wife run a master class right now. It's called Imagination. What is it?
Well, it's not a master class. My wife, Margaret, who began this program called the Imagination Workshop. She was in a play of Ionesco's in the Berkshires, and they saw a production of Gertrude Stein's In Circles done by these patients who were long-term patients, psychiatric patients in a hospital, severely ill patients. And when Margaret saw them in the play, they were, she couldn't believe it was the same patients that she saw on the streets, because they walked in the streets of Stockbridge. So when she came back to New York, she started it at Mount Sinai Hospital, and we were in a play together in New York at the Actor Studio, and she invited me to participate. And then it began, we developed it together, and it moved from there to a long-term hospital where the patients wrote plays. Most of these young patients were in suicidal observation for 2 years. And when they played characters removed from themselves, they were able to express feelings, needs, and desires that they couldn't do as themselves. And it was revelatory in these hospitals. The psychiatrists were stunned that the patients had this ability. And then when we went to Los Angeles, we began it there, and it's still running. It's the longest running arts and mental health program in the world. And she did it, my wife.
My mind is going in two separate directions right now, because I want to ask you about that and the importance of that type of work that you're doing. But we also have a question from Jerry Gilbert, and it goes back to Philadelphia and you being here. And is there any part of your early life that you drew on in the creation of those two brothers?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I think the reason that it's done all over, now I'm not consciously, when I wrote it, wasn't aware of that, because, when I wrote it, I mean, people would ask me, well, did you come from a family? Were you a pickpocket and thief? Did you have a brother that never left the house because he was terrified he would die, couldn't breathe? The one brother, Treat, tells Philip that if he goes out, he's going to get an allergic reaction and die from the air. And so
that's the way we all feel right now.
Yeah, that's right. We all feel that way now. It's amazing, because he covers his face to get something outside, and it's exactly what we're doing. But so these are extreme types. So Philip, who stays in, what I analyze, why is it so successful? Philip is the part of us that is scared and withdrawn and afraid to do certain things, to take risks. Treat is the other side, who is out there, has no impulse control, gets angry and he can't stop himself. He's right out there, emotional. And the father figure is the man who sort of integrates these two parts of themselves. So I think when I wrote it, I was keying into pieces of myself that are universal. Everybody has aspects of this, and but I wasn't aware of it at the time.
A play doesn't last this long without it being universal and touching into something about each of us. And I don't think people would have been attracted to the idea of switching genders and putting it in different cultures if it wasn't touching on the essence of the human condition. And so much about our fears and desires to connect. We know you studied with Strasberg. In fact, you played him in a movie, in the James Dean movie. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, I did.
One of our attendees, Benjamin Bass, wants to know if you ever experimented with other work, with like Chekhov or any other different theatrical pedagogies.
Well, you mean acting or directing wise? Is that what you're referring to?
Either way.
Well, I think I was
acting. Actually, he specifically goes acting.
Well, I acted in a little bit of Chekhov. As an acting student, I worked in Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller, and we did actually a play we did at the Bessie V. Hicks. The first thing we did was Memory of Two Mondays. Yeah. And I was about 19, but I played this 80-year-old man, you know, which now I could play without acting, you know, so that, in the old days. But I played a lot of, I did a lot of plays, and of course I was motivated. Chekhov is a humanist, you know, he writes real human, what extraordinary, beautiful man. I mean, there were a few of them around, and I also, you know, I was influenced by Beckett. Obviously, acting in Waiting for Godot was an extraordinary event for me. I mean, I never knew that was an influence. I never knew I would become a playwright. Although as a young kid, I was involved with science fiction. I published an amateur science fiction magazine called Fan Warp, and there were a lot of writers that wrote for this magazine. You know, I had a few issues of it. So I was writing. I was 11 or 12, but I was you know, in Orphans, Harold escapes all the time from ropes and chains. He's an admirer of the Houdini. And when I was a kid, I was a magician. When I was 11, 12, and I was an escape artist. I was a young escape artist. They put me in chains and ropes, and I got out of that. So that was a big influence in those years.
That's wonderful. That's great. So I was saying that these last two plays that I read of yours, and actually I know there's some others as well, you've set in Philadelphia. I mean, you haven't lived in Philadelphia for years. I mean, it's been decades, actually.
Oh, yes, it's been a lot of decades. Because I left when I was about, I guess it was about 19 or 20. I left for New York. So I haven't been there for, you know, 60 years.
Well, but your last couple plays, I mean, were produced in 2019, 2018, and they're set here in Philadelphia. What keeps you coming back in your mind?
Well, my greatest escape was escaping from Philadelphia. I don't mean that negatively, but, you know, I just needed to get out into the world and not stay, you know, as a playwright and as an actor and everything. But I think you can't escape your roots. It's my roots. I mean, I love Philly. I mean, you know, everything that, you know, is there. I went, you know, cheesesteaks, Central High that I went to, you know, I mean, everything is Philadelphia. So although I never, you know, when I wrote these plays, let's say, I think those two plays are set in Philadelphia. And, you know, I'm a big fan of the Philadelphia Phillies, the Eagles. I mean, you know, that stays with me forever. And there's a baseball metaphor in a number of my plays, you know, because my father was a big fan of the Phillies and the A's. You know, he turned styles when he was a kid at the baseball stadium when Connie Mack bought Ty Cobb at the end of his career. And Ty Cobb was supposed to be a racist, and probably was to a degree, would come in and see my father, who was about 12 years old, and he said, "Hey kid, come on into the baseball field with me. I want to hit some fungos to you." So my father developed this relationship with Ty Cobb, who was, you know, everybody who scared the hell out of every other baseball player on the teams. So this is Philadelphia. I mean, you know, I love Philly.
That's great, and I have to think that some of the grit and the edge that you give to your characters is part of who you are, and it's part of being here. I want to come back to the work that you do in the community. One of the things that we talk about at Theater Exile, and whether or not it's put outwardly or inwardly and affects the decisions that we make, is that we believe that to live as an artist is an honor, and that there's a great responsibility to choose to live it as an artist. It's not as easy, but it's important. And I see the work that you do, and I don't know if you've ever thought about that consciously, about your role as people responsible for your community. I mean, obviously you can see it in the work that you're doing, that you and Margaret have been doing for years, but is that something that you could talk about a little bit?
Well, as a playwright, I mean, there are issues that are burning issues within me, but I never like to just write about the issues. I like to write about the characters, and then it speaks to the individual and the human issues that are there, you know. And as as I think I mentioned to you, this new play that I wrote called The Display Man that I sent you just now takes place in Philadelphia in a display window, downtown Philly, and about an old Jewish man and an old black man who are very, very close. And the display man is doing the last trim of this women's apparel shop. My father actually was a Philadelphia display man, you know, and that was, most of my plays have nothing to do with me. They're about unconscious issues within myself, but I don't write about characters that I knew. But this play sort of is a celebration of my father in a certain way, and so that takes place in Philly, and there's a lot of social issues in there. It's about the Holocaust, it's about slavery, it's about the relationship of these two men. And I never consciously say, well, I'm going to write a socially relevant play, you know, I'm going to do it that way. I don't do it. It comes out of the characters and what they're saying. And I guess those are issues within myself. That's who I am. And that's who my wife is. She started this extraordinary program dealing with these patients who were considered treatment failures. And she brought them to life with these exercises she created, and not as therapy, but as an artistic expression. And they create characters much like as I create characters as a writer. So I think we come to it that way.
I could just say that I don't think of being. I never really thought of being socially responsible. I feel like I'm pretty socially irresponsible. I've come to all kinds of things late that you're supposed to recycle and things like that. But it was the power of the theater that when I saw those, you know, I was in this play with UNESCO, a very, one of the world's greatest playwrights, and he was there. We were working on the play, and we knew these patients who were kind of scary, and we didn't know they were withdrawn. And then when I saw them do this play, I was like, it just inspired me with my life's choice of being an actress, with the power of theater to transform our lives. And that's why I did it. And I also felt that they were our fellow artists, but they were trapped. And I felt this need to kind of help them out of the cave, you know, like those boys in the soccer team. Somebody had to help them out, and somehow we know the way out, somehow in some unconscious way that I think all of us, you know, that the human condition.
All actors know when they play a character, they can behave in ways that they may not behave like in life. They can take risks and chances emotionally as the character that they may not do in life. So actors understand that process, and when you put that in a psychiatric environment of severely ill patients, and through a wide range of diagnoses, when they play characters. I mean, some of these patients, some of them were catatonics. I mean, you know, and they suddenly were singing and dancing and playing. And the psychiatrist on the unit, when we did it at Mount Sinai in a crisis intervention unit, they said, "What did you do to our patients?" They couldn't believe it, because it really, you know, it dumbfounded them. What was happening to the patients? How could they behave that way? But, you know, there are actors who are very withdrawn. Some of them, when they play characters, they release their demons and whatever is inside themselves in the characters.
And their joy.
And their joy. Of course, the joy is the big thing.
Well, I mean, everyone who's here today in this conversation has been drawn to theater in some way, shape, or form. And we've all sat in the dark and watched others on a journey that has somehow unleashed us. I know certainly for me, I cannot count the amount of times I've belly laughed and cried in the dark, and because it releases us. And we know historically the theater has been tried to be pushed away, and it keeps popping back. There's something essential about this, and we're in an experience right now where we're being separated from each other. But I know, and I'm hopeful that we will all be able to come back and gather together and be in the room, because there is something extraordinary about watching those risks that you just talked about, Lyle. A person going through these emotional risks and challenging themselves, and us being there for it and going with it, because sometimes we can't do it ourselves, and they can unlock those things for us because we can experience, because we're in the room together. So it is incredibly incredibly important in just and allowing us to think and see someone else's point of view and understand. We are at a time when there's so much division and partisan bickering. The most important thing we can do is learn and be able to appreciate how someone else thinks.
Well,
So,
like UNESCO said, you know, art, politics divide and art unites.
Art integrates.
Integrate.
it's wonderful. What I'd like to do, because I wanted to formulate this whole series of conversations like our post-show discussions that we've had in the theater. And the thing that I missed the last time so much was actually seeing everyone. And Jack, who's behind the scenes and making all this happen, I'd love it if anyone wants to see and ask Lyle a question directly, or we can talk to each other. We can open this up out of the webinar format and be able to see each other, Jack, if that's something that you're able to do or people are interested in doing. So I'll see if that happens, if someone else can make that happen, and I can ask. And while that's happening, I'm going to ask another question. So I just read Perk, which is I think your most recent play, correct?
That's correct.
That's correct. And it takes place in, again, Philadelphia, somewhere in Philadelphia. And it follows a young man named Douglas who is manipulated all his life. And there's certain resonance with him, to the character Philip, I believe, in
Right.
Orphans.
Yeah, there is.
The play broke my heart a little bit. I have to say, when I was reading it, it hung on my heart, because there's I don't like seeing people hurt and manipulated by society. Just, you know, it pains me. And I feel like you took a lot of the issues that you had in Orphans, but you sort of turned them inside out a little bit. You put that character out into the world, more vulnerable and exposed. Can you talk about that character and the drive to write this play, Perk, and maybe tell a little bit what it's about?
Well, I don't know. I can't identify the drive that got me to write it. I just started writing a scene with these two detectives who were interviewing this man who was accused of killing a woman in the park.
Mm-hmm.
And they were falsely manipulating him to confess to a crime he never did. Mm-hmm. And it followed his journey into prison and meeting his cellmate, who was a black man, mm-hmm. who actually helps him, sort of like Harold helps, you know, it's the same situation in a way. He helps him and gives him the courage to go out in the world and find the actual perpetrator. It's a perp. He's called the perpetrator, but the perp is out there still doing it, and it's his journey, you know, and we did it, you know, off Broadway, and it was a very riveting experience on the stage, you know, and I hope there'll be a lot of more productions of it, you know. It'll be a perfect. I mean, it's exactly Theater Exile's cup of tea. These are all exiles.
Yeah. Margaret Spencer wanted to know if you work on just one play at a time, and or do you work on multiple things? And also, and this I think is fascinating, have you ever been in a situation where you started to write one character and they actually ended up in a different play?
Oh, yeah, I probably have. I'm trying to recall. I do write more than one at a time. I have beginnings of plays or fragments, and I write these situations, and sometimes it goes and sometimes it doesn't go, and sometimes I come back to it, mm-hmm. you know, and I'm actually doing that now, going back to a play that I tried to write the first act of, and yeah, I think that there are characters that that I've started in one play and they may have ended up. Well, it's not a different. It's a different situation. The character drove it into become another situation than what I thought it would be, and that has happened absolutely.
That's great. That was Margaret's question. I'm glad you guys are starting to pop up because I honestly miss seeing everyone. Most of you will see me at the plays, either at the curtain speech or after the shows to talk about the plays. Theater Exile is small and mighty, and one of the best things is actually our audiences. As I've said to anyone who listen, I'll have lunch with anyone of our audience members because they're fascinating and daring people, and the people that are attracted to Theater Exile are people that really like to grapple over real issues, very proactive in their lives and in their communities. So I've missed seeing people's faces. So this is wonderful. You have to turn on your videos so I can see some people right now. Does anyone else have any other questions? Oh my God.
Look at that.
Oh my God, look at that.
I'm viewing Lester Berman's screen, but that's okay. Yeah, I guess this is why we keep it in the webinar format most of the time. But at the end, we just wanted to be able to see everyone, and so that people could talk if anyone has any questions themselves, either for Lyle, Margaret, or myself. You guys are great. I love the idea. I love Margaret's question that a character might end up in a different play than you started off with. As I said, the character of Philip in Orphans, who is really vulnerable and he's been sheltered and he's been loved by Treat in the only way that he knows how to love him. But of course that has been oppressive. That keeps him bound and caged. But I do believe he does it from love. And the character of Douglas in Perk gets let out into the world, and he's much more vulnerable in the world. And it seems like you're attracted a bit to the people who are having trouble finding their place in the world.
It seems that way, yeah. I identify with them.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Lyle, Margaret, I just want to thank you so much for doing this, and I want to thank you again for that phone call. It really meant the world to me, and it really launched this series of conversations. I know you couldn't do the first one, but this launched this whole series of public conversations that we're having, and it really makes while we're separated, our world a little smaller because we can reach each other a little bit more.
Well, I actually see my daughter Catherine in one of these pictures.
Oh wait, I saw Catherine Kessler there. Is that your daughter?
That's my daughter. She's in. We had dinner on Zoom the other day. My daughter's in Queens, and my son is in Brooklyn, and we're here in the West Village, and so we all sat and had dinner at separate places. That's
there's Megan.
Hello, Megan.
We know Megan.
And I see my cousins there, Elizabeth Brady and her daughter Julia.
Hi.
This is a whole family get together. I can't believe it. I see Lester Berman.
Lester.
I don't see his picture, but he's
turn yourself on, Lester.
He's very shy.
That's wonderful. Well, we are somewhat of a family at Exile, and if you can bring yourself to make it back to Philadelphia again, and when you're driving through town, we'll take you to some nice restaurants that we have when they open up again, and get you to look back at Philadelphia. I know it's been inspiring you, and it continues to inspire you. It finds its way subconsciously or otherwise into your plays, and so we'll have to get you to South Philadelphia and let it.
We can't wait. You've got to do one of my plays, if not Orphans, something else very soon, so I can get back there.
Yep. All right, we will lure you back, no doubt, no doubt. Well, thank you again,
Deborah. Thank you.
Any final words for us, Lyle? You've been around the world. You've Margaret, you can say, when I was talking with Ionesco, it's such wonderful inspiration for all of us. Is there any other things you'd like to tell us as we continue on our journey?
Well, you know, the theater, even though we're isolated now and all the theaters are closed around the world, I mean, when this reading of Orphans was done with Alec Baldwin, with an actor in Sydney, Australia, and the other actor was in Melbourne. Alec Baldwin was in the Hamptons, and the girl reading the stage direction was in Manhattan. I mean, it was an unbelievable thing of people on different continents reading this play. And but the theater will always come back. There's no way, as long as there are human beings, they'll be up on the stage there acting, because it's a human element. It's incredible. I've written for film, I've written for the stage, but you know, we lived in Santa Monica for 28 years. I raised our children there, Catherine and Michael, and but we had to come back to New York. You know, my wife was originally a stage actress, and then she worked in films and television. But we needed to be. I mean, the theater is the heart and soul to me of creation. I have to get live actors reading my words and behaving on stage. So. It was a wonderful, my calling you when I saw that you were doing my play, and I called you, and so it was wonderful to reach you. I didn't know if I would reach you. I called the number because nobody's in their offices anymore. So you answered. I said, "Is this Deborah?" You know, and it's great. It was magical. So this is very inspirational for me, and I appreciate having the moment to be able to talk to you, Deborah.
It's been a true joy. And so thank you both so much for being here. And thank you all for joining us. We're gonna keep doing these conversations. They'll be about every other week. So make sure, for those of you who are new to Theater Exile here, to get on our email list and you'll get notified of them. We're doing some workshops as well. And in about a month, we'll figure out how to do some readings of short plays. And we're just gonna keep staying connected, and we live in a moment of hope, because that's because we want to be together, and we will be together. So we will figure out how to stay connected until we can be in a room together. So thank you so much. And thanks, Jack, who's been behind the scenes and making this all happen.
Thank you, Jack and Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll talk soon.
Talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care.